Hey guys, Unexceptional Rounder here, and today I want to review a couple hands that I played yesterday during my live stream on Twitch TV. I was playing heads up so that the focus was only on two tables. I'm still trying to win the battle of aspect ratios on the poker tables and, well, everything else about. Anyway, some really interesting hands came up that will demonstrate concepts from our lesson on big pots and big hands. Here's the first one. Okay, we have King 7 in the small on the button here, heads up. Now, I know we haven't discussed specific heads up strategy, but for the purposes of this, it could just as well be, me on the button versus the big blind, or me having position versus my opponent who doesn't have position. So the basic hand reading and other concepts all apply just the same as they do in heads up. The only difference is you're always, on the button versus the big blind, essentially. So, what's this flop? We've got, obviously a pretty good draw with the nut flush draw. We don't have the ace, and we don't have any other draws. But when I'm playing this, I kind of think, well, I'm probably not folding. And the reason is because we're up against one opponent, we've got the nut flush draw, and we can force him off of a lot of hands by the river. Even if we don't hit our flush, I'm, almost about 50-50. Now, granted, there isn't much in the pot, so when I say I'm not folding, I'm not just going to call a shove here. That would obviously be very foolish, but my intention is I'm going to see another street. So, we want to build a pot here as if we're going to hit, because the bigger we build the pot, the better we'll either be able to force the player off the hand, or we should be able to bluff. Now, when we talked about pot control, we'll get into it when we go over some bluffing, things like that, but one of the things that once you understand the concepts of pot control, you also understand how to use it against your opponents. I talked about it a little bit, but if we build up a pot that's very large, it's going to be hard for our opponent to call with medium hands, and that'll make it easier for us to bluff, and it will also make it so that we get paid more if we can hit a big hand and the other player has a big hand. So when we're playing hands like this, we want to think about both those sort of scenarios as the hand goes, and then we can start narrowing in on our opponent's range a little bit more. So we're going to make a standard continuation bet, and I kind of zoomed in so that we could get a full screen effect here, so you don't see me actually clicking the buttons, but I bet $1 into what I believe was like $1.50, and we hit. So what are we going to do? Or, obviously we're not going to slow play, and this is a very good situation because we do have position. Now, all this is pretty straightforward, but I want to talk about what happens on the turn a little bit. So I play around, try to figure out what to bet, and I settle in on, it looks like, what, 275 into what was 335. So I don't just, fire pot, but I do make what would be a normal turn bet. Now, let's think about a couple things here. What sort of range can our opponent put us on, and what sort of range do we have our opponent on at this point? Well, all our opponent did was call out of position and call a flop bet. So at this point, his range is still pretty wide. He could have a flush draw of his own, although it's less likely because, we have two spades in our hand. He could have a weak ace. He could have some sort of, it's hard for him to have a lot of other hands. He could have a pair of nines. He would definitely call once with a pair of nines. At this point, we think those nines are probably going to fold anyway, but we weren't going to win an all-in pot, against a pair of nines anyway, so it doesn't matter. Again, think about what hands we're playing against. Think about what hands we actually will get paid, and those are the hands we bet against. So the hands we get paid against are if he has a set, which I think a lot of times he would have raised on the turn. He could have an ace very easily, and so that's kind of what we're betting against here is an ace. We don't expect him to fold many aces. It's heads up. It's hard for me to have a flush, and he called the flop. So the only way we're really going to get a decent amount of money out of this is if he has the ace, or if he has a set or something like that. Maybe like a 2 pair, maybe even ace 9. That would be perfect. So we're going to go ahead and bet. Now what happens is he ends up raising. So every single bet, every single action gives us more information. The call on the flop gave us a little bit of information. When somebody calls out of position, it's hard to float out of position. Now, a float, for anyone who doesn't know, is essentially calling the continuation bet to try and take it away on the turn. Normally that's done in position, and it can be done out of position, but it's a little difficult. This is a strange board to be, just pure bluffing. So when he raises the turn, and as a general rule, players don't raise the turn with bluffs a lot. I just, at the low stakes, turn raises are generally very honest. They won't be all the time, but as a general rule, if you get raised on the turn and you have kind of a weak hand, I'm telling you, you're going to save yourself a lot of money if you just get away from it. So with that said, now what's his range look like? All of a sudden his range looks really strong, and we've got the nuts. So what are our options? We could re-raise, and it may be the best play right now, because if a 4th spade comes on the river, that's gonna ruin our hand, right? It's gonna be bad. I don't think a king or a jack, like, something to complete the straight, would really damage us too bad here. The board could pair. That could really, one, that could make it so that we don't have the best hand anymore, and 2, that could definitely scare our opponent. So there's plenty of reasons to raise here. If we jam it all in, I think we might lose his 2 pair hands, but maybe not. So I think shoving all in here would be okay. However, I decide to call, and the only reason I call here is because I have position. So if there's any chance that he is making a move, which again, because I already stated that I don't think that's very often, that does sort of lean towards raising. And I think a raise here is fine. I don't think that's the incorrect play. In fact, it may even be the better play. However, I have position, and I tell myself that, well, I've got position, I want to use it. Once I call, we're going to have a pretty good pot, and it shouldn't be too hard to get it all in on the river, especially if he ends up firing out a bet of some kind. So let's see what ends up happening. I flat call here. All right. So now, what happened? Like, this isn't really perfect, right? If, one thing that I could have done is made a small raise on the turn. Again, that's pretty transparent. What I will say is that the hands I'm trying to get paid from are big hands, right? So again, I think that this is like the 3rd time I've looked at this hand. Tried to set this video up to record it a couple times, done it a few different ways, but this being like the 3rd time I've reviewed the hand, I actually almost like a turn shove or a turn re-raise better than calling. I don't mind using position, but I think looking at it, a lot of cards can come on the river that might shut down some of our action. Nonetheless, we do call, which I think is okay too. I don't think one is clearly better than the other, and using position to try to get more information is not going to be a bad thing. The other thing is, let's think about this. What if we raise the turn, he flat calls, and then he checks to us on the river? We're going to end up having to pretty much do the all-in bet ourselves. And even if I made it a little, like if I made a small raise, it's going to be a big all-in bet, right? So we would kind of rather have either a smaller all-in bet or a situation where we think he's going to bet, because once he bets here, he's going to have odds to call. He can't bet fold, really, unless he bets really small, unless he bets like, $6 or something. So let's look at what happens. Like I said, I'm playing 2 tables, so I just played a hand on the other table. All right. He ends up betting more than half pot. At this point, I recognize that he obviously has a worse flush. And I say obviously because he's played in such a way that's narrowed his range, and it made the hand at the end very, very easy to play. You know, obviously I can just shove in here. I know he's going to call, and he has the worst flush, and that's easy. But what I think what we can learn from this hand is how we looked at building this pot and how we narrowed the opponent's range. The other thing is I talked in the video about playing against their big hands. I see a lot of players. I saw somebody do it against me. I don't know if I uploaded the video or not, or if I was recording at the time, but the guy ended up hitting a set against me, slow playing, turning quads, slow playing, and getting 1 bet out of me on the river. On the flop, I had the nut flush draw. I was completely prepared to get all in. But instead of playing against the top of my range, he decided he wanted to try and slow play to get money from more of my range. Yeah, he probably got, maybe he got an extra bet, not really, but he did get, an extra bet out of me, I think, on the river, because I hit like second pair and he had slow played and made his hand look weak. But the point is he lost my entire stack, which I would have given to him because I wasn't folding the nut flush draw. And when you play against, the middle and bottom of people's ranges, you miss out on opportunities to get a full buy-in. And we were actually playing deep. This guy, if you look at this pot, I want to say he had $30, or maybe even a little bit more. So yeah, this is a $62 pot. So he ended up having the second nuts. I'm not saying he should have folded. I'm not saying that he played it incorrectly. What I'm saying is that if you don't play aggressively, if you don't try to get the money in the pot, you miss out on these opportunities. There are a lot of people who would not have played it, the way I did. And again, the shove on the turn would have been okay, but we had position. And that also shows that maybe Jack 2 suited isn't the hand to be playing out of position. He would not have gotten himself into that mess if he hadn't been playing, second best hands. And one thing that affects people's win rate more than they realize is suckouts. Now, he's going to just chalk that up to, well, I got sucked out, it was a bad beat. And that's true, but I would never take that bad beat. So that's a bad beat that he's taking that I'm not going to subject myself to, because I'm not going to play Jack 2 suited. So, if, you want to talk about like the war of, decisions and playing better hands, well, if you keep yourself out of situations where you can lose a lot of money, you are going to make significantly more. That's kind of a given. But people chalk a lot of their losses up to bad beats. But even if you get into a bad beat, one way to, win this battle is taking less bad beats than your opponents. And that's where that starting hand, playing quality starting hands and playing with position come into play. If he had position, I probably, if he wanted to get all in, yeah, it would have all gotten in. But if he had position here, I would not have been able to get as much information about his hand. If he had position, he would have been able to just flat call my bet. When I bet the river out of position and I couldn't shove all in, he could have said, you know what, there's, he could have the king here. If he wanted to make that read, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to just call. Like, I don't think his hand should be re-raising there, that river bet. If he had checked and I had bet 11, I don't think he shoves all in, because there's just nothing that I can call with, right? That's worse. Sure, a 10 high flush, but it just looks real strong. Yeah, maybe I can call, but I think the point isn't these specific hands. The point is sort of what we thought about on our way to the river. So, all right, don't want to beat that to death. But anyway, that's the first hand. Let me go get the second one. All right, here's our second hand. It's going to be sort of similar to the last one, except there's going to be some other dynamics. Also, again, notice I am in position here. It is much easier to win big hands in position. So I have Jack King offsuit. It's an easy raise, and I do something kind of interesting here. This guy, you see I've got an orange note on him there. He'd been pretty aggressive. He'd been 3-betting a lot. King Jack is a pretty easy hand to 4-bet fold because it's not good enough to call with. And I generally don't really like want to call because a lot of times his range is going to be ahead of mine, but it's got decent blockers. And let me pause it here. By blockers, I mean a lot of what he's going to be 3-betting is going to have like kings and jacks in it. So it takes some of his hands that have me beat away and adds more of like a it kind of makes it so that his range is generally going to be a little bit weaker than normal. So I go ahead and I do decide to 4-bet. I hadn't been doing it a ton, so he flat calls out of position, which is not something I recommend. All right, either you've got a good enough hand to get all in, or you don't really want to. Now, okay, here's one thing I'll say. Sometimes this is okay if you've got like aces. I wouldn't even really do it with kings because it's just hard to play. If an ace flops, it's really hard to deal with that out of position. But with aces, you can sometimes like flat call a 4-bet out of position and then like check jam the flop. All right, that's kind of a standard thing, but we're sort of deep here. So with us being as deep as we are, you just don't want to be caught playing deep out of position with a mediocre hand. And, you know, a little foreshadowing, but let's see what happens. All right, position. Really, really nice to have when you flop an open-ended draw with a weak hand. You know, what happens if I bet here and get raised? Yeah, I might be able to come over the top, but I'm almost always getting called by better, right? Well, obviously I'm always getting called by better, but if I bet and he raises, there's a good chance that he's got a solid hand. Like he's not gonna call my 4-bet and then check bluff the flop. Like that's pretty aggressive for 25 no limit. So I don't really expect that a lot. Not only that, but I've got a ton of equity in this hand. If I go ahead and throw a bet out there, allowing him to come in and push me off this hand, I've done something wrong, right? I've got almost like 40-something% equity here. My math's a little rusty, but we'll go over math theories and get the exact. But anyway, I've got 8 outs twice, so like 16 and 16, about, and not quite 40, but like 32, 35, something in that ballpark. I've got a good amount of pot equity here, and the pot's already big. It's $11.50. So by checking behind here, I get to see a free card. And I don't want to bet and risk him shoving me off of this great hand, because if he does that, he usually has me beat. And I'm going to get all my money in probably, because I'm not going to fold out all my equity, but I'm going to get my money in behind. So it's just not a good play. Yes, I'll take the pot down sometimes, but I don't expect that to be often enough here. And, you know, also, I don't have a queen, which means that his 3-bet, you know, calling range probably has a lot of queens in it. That's just sort of my thinking at the time, and I think it's pretty accurate. So I take the free card, and we hit, which is awesome, right? So when we hit, we now look at the, immediately, we're looking at the pot, his stack, our stack, which our stacks are about the same, and the pot's already 1150 because it was a 4-bet preflop. So we're in a great situation here where we can get all the money in. So now we just have to figure out how to get all the money in. And again, the hand in this situation sort of plays itself, but what I really think is important is going over how we got there and what we can learn from these situations, and also what not to do, because this guy was pretty solid. He's got the orange tag. He was pretty aggressive. I didn't really feel like I was making a ton of money from playing him, but I do think that he was making some mistakes, and one of them was, playing out of position against me. All right, he bets full pot. There's 1150 in there. When you hit the pot button, because of the rake, it throws the 12 out. What does he have? He clearly either has like ace queen, king, maybe kings. I've got a king, so that's not likely. Aces, probably not as likely. Maybe. I mean, he's on like aces, kings, queen, queens, king, queen, maybe. Tens, maybe. Right? There's not too many hands he can have here that don't have a good piece of this board or that aren't willing to call off. So again, just like the other hand, a lot of bad river cards can come, right? We could get a jack on the river. That would be terrible. We could get a king on the river. That would be pretty bad. An ace would be pretty ugly. A club would be ugly. So there's so many bad cards that can come, and the board is so drawy right now. Also, what did he expect us to do after we 4-bet? On the flop, he expected us to continuation bet. We checked back. So when he bets full pot, he's trying to make up for missed value, I think. Obviously it's, Monday morning quarterbacking is a little easier. I know what he has. But when I see that full pot bet, it tells me like, crap, I thought you were going to c-bet and I was going to jam the flop. Now I'm going to bet full pot to try to get the aggression back, get this pot back on track. He sort of lost the initiative here, and now he's trying to make this big bet because he thinks he has the best hand and the board's getting scary. So that's my interpretation of that. And what do we do in that situation? Well, because of all the bad cards that can come on the river, and because of how confident he is that he has the best hand and how many draws just became available, I think it's really easy to just shove it all in. And it looks kind of tilty, it looks kind of like we're just trying to throw him off the hand. But we'll see what happens here. Again, not being completely results oriented, but obviously we get a good result. So he had king queen offsuit, and you may say, well, yeah, he had a better starting hand and he hit the flop, and that's all great. But what he didn't have is he didn't have position and he didn't have initiative in the hand. If he had initiative, he could have c-bet the flop, and maybe we would have raised, and maybe he would have called, and he would have gotten his money in good, and that would have been fine. But because he didn't, it allowed us to control the situation much more. It allowed us to check behind the flop. Obviously we got lucky and hit our hand, but let's say we missed, right? Let's say the turn was, not an ace because we would have hit 2. But just that 5 or something. All right, now he bets 12 and we fold, right? Because now we don't have the odds. We don't think that we read his hand for something that he wasn't folding on the turn. So now when we see that we're not folding, or he's not folding, and we know that he's got a piece of it, so we'll get away from it. So in that situation, we either are going to hit and get all in, or we're going to miss and fold to his bet and lose very little. So because of those are our options, it shows how powerful. Yeah, sorry about that interruption. But anyway, to wrap the video up, the bottom line here is don't play medium strength hands out of position, especially not when you're calling out of position. These hands may seem like they're very, very straightforward, and in both cases I turned the big hand, so it's not as common. You probably turn a big hand as often as you flop a big hand, but it doesn't show the 3-street process as clearly as like what I talked about in the PowerPoint, but it does kind of show how you need to get the money in there, and how when you have position, it's much easier because your opponent can put a lot of that money in there for you, and that's what makes playing out of position so hard. So I hope I covered everything all right and explained it clearly. I know I have a tendency to ramble a little bit, but there's a lot of different stuff to consider, and I just want to make sure that I'm explaining it as well as I can. So if you guys have questions, please leave them in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you guys can maybe tune in next week. I plan on doing my live streams Friday nights, so it should be, ideally, I would like to do them Friday nights from 7 Eastern to like 9 Eastern, and hopefully next week I'll do it that time, and I'll put out an announcement beforehand, and maybe we'll get a few more people on there, get a little bit more interaction. I think that'd be fun, and should be a good learning experience. So all right guys, that's gonna do it for today. Good luck at the tables, and you guys keep on grinding. If you guys enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit the like button. That helps me out. If you want to see more of this stuff, go ahead and subscribe in the upper left. Check out my channel, that's in the upper right. And 2 recent videos on the left, one about bankroll management, and the right, another hand history review.